Hello, my name is Marke Kivijärvi, and I'm really happy to sit down with Richard Longman and Stewart Campbell. Richard coming from the Open University Business School and Stewart from the School of Arts and Creative Technologies at the University of York. And we're here to talk about Richard and Stewart's teaching case titled Leadership, Legacy and Accountability. And this case is among the finalists of the 2025 Darkside Case competition by the Critical Management Studies Division of the Academy of Management. Congratulations to you both and warm welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you. Lovely to see you.
Okay, to get us started, I was wondering if you could briefly describe the teaching case. What is it about and what kinds of questions does it raise?
Sure, thank you. The case centres on a widely reported incident when the orchestral conductor, Sir John Eliot Gardner, reportedly hit a singer during a performance in 2023. And it was the incident, but also the reactions that followed that prompted us to ask a number of questions, such as how do organisations navigate misconduct when the leader in question has an extraordinary legacy? John Eliot Gardner is one of the biggest names in conducting around, and his legacy undoubtedly had an impact on how the organisation responded to the violent assault that he made on another. And sort of from that, we started to talk about how we might think about leadership not just as a technical or a strategic role, but one that is ethically embodied and a relational practice. So through that, the case is trying to support some critical learning around leadership ethics in contexts where performance and sort of artistic vision and organisational power are very real. So we ask students to think about how legacy and cultural capital influence leadership responses to leadership misconduct, to question those dominant leadership imaginaries, especially those that are rooted in the charisma and authority and individual brilliance you might expect of someone like in a conductor role. And then about how organisations should respond, what sort of mechanisms should be in place that ensure sort of fairness, procedural fairness, but also morally reflexive and inclusive. Stuart, do you want to talk a little bit about why this topic really interests us?
Sure. I think we were really drawn to this case because it's not exceptional, but it's actually quite symptomatic of things we're seeing, things that are being reported in the music industries at the moment. I think the Gardner case is just one of many wider leadership patterns where, as Richard said, these sort of powerful individuals are shielded by this kind of notion of reputation, creative brilliance, and perhaps creative and economic successes sort of might justify coercive behavior. And the cultural sectors in the UK in particular are getting, there's a reckoning here at the moment. There's a lot of media reports. There's been a government body set up to tackle some of these issues in the music industries. And I think conducting and the role of the conductor offers quite a unique lens for leadership studies. Leadership is something that's simultaneously strategic, symbolic, effective, and embodied. And I think this case study allowed us to look at that very multifaceted perspective of leadership through the case. It was important for us to, given the quite timeliness of these issues, it was important for us to draw together some really rich, engaging qualitative evidence to support the case study. There's really detailed media reports from UK outlets, The Guardian, Financial Times, public statements from all parties involved, which make really interesting research data for students studying this case. In the case as well, in response to what happened, the conductor himself had to put out various public statements to sort of justify his behavior, as it were, which are really quite revealing in itself to have that two sort of sides of the story. And And I think also the case is very much going on. It wasn't a one-off incident after the case study, after the incident happened. The conductor set up a new choir. People are joining the choir now. It's something that is still here and still lingering. So I think it has some real relevance and resonance to work going on at the moment. Richard, do you want to say a bit more about sort of, I guess, the pedagogical side of things and the learning experience aims for the students looking at the case study?
Yeah, sure. So let's try and sell this to people who might want to use the case. I think if you were teaching a course on organizational behavior, on leadership and ethics, management in creative and cultural industries, HR, even, this is going to support those sort of that interdisciplinary discussion between organizational and management practices and the role of leadership and other sources of not knowledge. So we encourage students to think about the ethical limits of legacy and cultural authority. And we introduce this idea of moral responsibility. I'll talk about that a bit later. But we do that because we were inspired by a framework that was developed by Nina Kuvinen and Greta Rennes in the journal Leadership, where they have an empirical study of conductors, and they generate this framework which revolves around kinesthetic empathy, aesthetic judgment, and relational listening. And I think our contention is that moral engagement is like needs to be injected into this in order to create the kind of leadership practice that I think we'd be looking for in sort of contemporary organisations. And so students, like if you have a course where you're looking at developing or revising codes of conduct for leadership practice, if you're working with like high stakes or high performance arena where there's intense pressure, but also there's that element where students will get to reflect on their own assumptions and their aspirations. What sort of leader do they want to be? What will they do when the pressures of performance and ethical questions collide? How will they respond? Will they respond by punching the singer who's nearest to them? I think we'd suggest that wasn't great practice. I don't think that I'd find myself punching Stewart very often. So yeah, it's an invitation for students to sit with the dark side and to stay with the trouble, not to sensationalize it, but to learn from it and see that leadership as something that can be felt and practiced and cultivated. I think that's where we get to. And if people are still listening, it would be great if they want to take up this case.
Thank you so much, Richard and Stewart. That was a perfect sales pitch of the case. And of course, I have to say that having read the teaching case and the teaching notes, it really is a very engaging story, of course, and narrative. And I think because of the media publicity, it is of course very, I suppose, something that students can easily relate to. And we are all consumers of some sorts of cultural products. So also in that sense, it is sort of sits somewhat close to us. And I think that it's easily understandable. And then you can start sort of bridging the leadership behaviors perhaps to other fields, other types of organizations where you might encounter similar types happening. And I noticed that myself, when I was reading the case, I was specifically sort of intrigued by the sort of the high pressure culture that you are studying and thinking about how we can find similar logics in other types of fields. If we look at how organizations that aim for sort of perfection and peak performance in specific time spaces, well, let's say in ballet, top sports even, so where we are very, very close to these sensuous embodied labor processes. And then when we look at that, well, what kinds of goal setting are we producing in these kinds of fields, and what types of leadership practices they might legitimize. And I think that you have shown exactly how we sort of build this, well, perhaps cultural legacy and the leadership legacy, how they intertwine in these specific notions around how what we are trying to achieve. So I think that it will provide very, very sort of useful notions for students. And I really sort of also the interdisciplinarity that you introduced. So it's very interesting, I think.
Thanks. I'm glad you pick up on the idea of the sensuous. I think that very often we can have these discussions about organizations and management and leadership, and not and to overlook the fact that these are things that are experienced not just through the mind but through our bodies, and to engage with that gives a really vital character to these sometimes abstracted ideas that we try to communicate to students.
Yeah, exactly. And well, what you also mentioned that, well, of course, because sometimes when we look at the media gaze around these sort of very troubling instances in organizations, we might sort of just think that, okay, we are just sort of we are not discussing them for the purpose of sort of well, just pointing at that, okay, this is going on and how terrible it is, but also what we can learn from it and how we can then start initiating the deep structural changes, which is, of course, at the core of what CMS is all about and what we are trying to sort of disrupt these sort of harmful practices that go on. And I think that the sort of acts of moral engagement that you sort of propose as a sort of framework for ethical and socially sustainable leadership, it is one good way forward to start thinking about exactly how we relate to the embodied relational processes going inside the labor. And well, I was thinking that, of course, Richard, I know that you have served the CMS community through leadership in Critical Management Studies Division of the Academy of Management for quite a while now. And you are now soon coming to the end of your 5-year term as a chair in the Critical Management Division. So I was wondering that it would be very interesting to hear how you sort of reflect your journey within the CMS community, but also as a scholar doing research in CMS themes and teaching these kinds of issues.
Thanks, Marka. Yeah. So yeah, I'm coming to the end of 5 years as chair of the CMS division, and I think what stands out most for me is the international community, the truly diverse folk who connect with CMS. So the division hasn't been simply an intellectual home, but it's been a political home, and that has been very vividly played out in recent years with the way we have had to confront genocide, and that we have had to support other divisions who are experiencing very real attacks on their intellectual freedom. So it's an intellectual home, a political home, but it's also an effective home for me. It's a place where I physically feel comfortable amongst people who share many of my values and my hopes for the future. I think CMS is a place where critique is increasingly less abstract or academic in that narrow sense, but it feels more lived and collective, certainly through some of the struggles that we try to navigate as a community together, sometimes successfully, other times less successfully. I think one of the big benefits, one of the big opportunities I've had through the community is to support initiatives I guess like the dark side case study, like on using thinking about PDWs that we run on embodied methodologies, creating mentoring spaces that centre early career scholars and historically marginalised voices, and all of that has sort of like infused my research, through exposure to new feminist, decolonial, post-human thinking, because CMS is not just a body of knowledge. It's a commitment to resisting managerialism, to imagining an alternative futures for all, and that comes out in the research that I've been doing, but also in teaching like this, where CMS ideas can be really foundational to the core. And I'm currently leading the redesign of an MBA program, and there's an awful lot of CMS inspired thinking around there. Ethics, care, systemic change, things that are not just presented as sort of like cool alternatives to have, but things that are baked in to the design and the curriculum. And one of the people who I've met on my journey is Stewart, and we've working together as academic colleagues. But prior to that, we'd been musical colleagues. We're both musicians, and we've both sung together. We've done recitals together. So this is a lovely colliding of professional and personal lives. But I'll leave Stuart to talk about his own journey.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think I'm actually just beginning my journey into sort of the CMS area, and I'm absolutely not a CMS researcher per se, but I think I come to critical perspectives in management through lived experiences, really, none of which include being punched in the face by Richard or anyone else for that matter. But I've worked in the music industry in a number of leadership positions, running festivals, concert halls, charities, and I've definitely witnessed the music industry's dark side firsthand, actually. I did an MBA, which prompted me to start thinking critically about these management contexts that I found myself in, very challenging management contexts. I then did a PhD looking at audience behavior, which got me thinking about kind of structural inequalities and gatekeeping and intermediaries, and how actually we, the way we listen to music, engage with music, is very much shaped by powerful forces at times. And then I become a lecturer in music management at the University of York, where I am now. And I guess some of the areas that Rich has talked about, I see every day in the music industry, and my participants and the people I work with in my research see. For example, I'm doing a current project looking at early career musicians, and you really see this systemic reproduction of inequalities, sector challenges around gender, power, control, legitimacy. I say, what music is, are we allowed to listen to, and who determines what that music looks like? And I'm also teaching music management and leadership in music contexts. So thinking about critically how the music managers I'm teaching will respond to these contexts in the future. And I think what's been really fascinating for me working with Richard and being introduced to this sort of world of critical management studies is that for me, when I think about the music industry and management literature, music pops up quite a lot and quite persistently. There's some really obvious examples, for example, in leadership literature around leadership metaphor as conducting as a metaphor for leadership. Leadership is a bit like conducting. And another one we see is organizational life is quite improvisatory, like jazz. And there are many, many inspiring things about the music industry, and I wouldn't be in this business, I wouldn't be researching this business if I didn't think so. But it does have a real darker side, as the Gardner case exemplifies. So I guess for me, there's, if I was being sort of quite playful, there's an absurdity in looking to the music industry for exemplars of leadership and of these things. And I think through working with Richard and the CMS area, it offers a really fascinating space to unpack some of that stuff. And this case study that we've worked on has been a really, really good space to start doing that, I think.
Thank you. It's so fascinating. I sort of, I don't know, maybe interpreting by what you say, it's sort of the beauty around maybe CMS as a space is that it brings together so many different branches of research, so many different perspectives. So as you raise, we might be looking at gendered inequalities, racial inequalities, and sort of depending on the lens that we adopt, and still we can sort of share the home together and sort of develop different methodologies around and sort of as Richard you described that we are perhaps having this momentum where we start looking even more closely and closely the lived experiences of people and trying to really understand what is going on and what kinds of emotions they go through and how we can then also repair the emotional side of the experience perhaps and sort of maybe the two of you working together, it seems also very inspirational that you can sort of combine your, well, personal interests and your work in I don't know, private work and the academic work and different kinds of arenas sort of mesh together. So that's very important here. And I don't know, having spoken to also others while reflecting on these dark side cases, so it seems that many of the topics arise from where people start observing things around them. So it's very much this, I don't know, how we are as human beings in the spaces that we inhabit and how we then want to really capture the processes and practices and start uncovering that, well, what is actually going on in here. So I think that that is perhaps something that unites CMS scholars. It is not, of course, something reserved only for the CMS, but maybe one of the core running threads. I don't know how you feel about that, but
Yeah, I think, I I work in a business school. I have to hang around with people who are interested in management and organization theory. So what better antidote is there to connect with bodies of knowledge that are much more alive and felt and experienced through the ears and the eyes as in through notes and sounds rather than just through words and two by two matrices. It's great to step outside um, of your natural habitat and to bring back with you those new experiences that are gonna shape how you see about the ideas you encounter on a daily basis, and that's been one of the real joys and something I hope to continue doing more of.
yeah, well, I really feel that the result of your collaboration, it is such a beautifully told case study, and I now just wonder that how do you feel about the process of writing together? You described a little bit about sort of your personal connections and how it was wonderful to start working together on this project and doing research. Is there something memorable that has stuck with you uh, throughout this process, something that you would like to share?
I think that for me, if I can go first, something that is particularly memorable about this process that I've really enjoyed writing about this process is that I'm still a practicing musician, so I still do lots of singing myself, and I am still faced with contexts where I'm singing away with a conductor in front of me, and it's amazing how when you start thinking about these things, it can be a real distraction from the music at hand because I'd be sitting in performance contexts and thinking, hang on a second, why did they use their body like that? And why did they talk to that person in that way? And then you sort of step back from that and it's like, what's going on in the pub after the concert and why are they talking about the conductor in that way? And how does that way link to these systems and this context and the previous concert? And I think just a sort of the real lovely thing about this is actually it's been a way for me to think quite critically about new music and creating new music now rather than just reflecting on the past. in ways that I perhaps would have entirely taken for granted. I think that's a really nice thing about this case study as well. From Richard made the point about working in a business school and sort of coming to this, but actually working in music and working in arts and humanities. Um, I think I take some of these things for granted all the time. So actually to bring in some of that sort of critique and a way to sort of analyze this and sort of spin it on its head and look at it in a different ways has been a really, really, really nice, memorable thing for me about writing this case study.
Yeah, I'd say that, together and individually, we've worked with a range of people, conductors, some extremely nice and good, and some frankly quite disgusting. Um, and so our conversations, have have centered around these experiences, and thinking about, is can eye contact between a conductor and a performer ever be ethically neutral? I mean, how are these power relations playing out on on stage in real time, often in front of audiences, and then what happens when that is taken backstage, and what are the shifts there, and how are those relationships constructed? So yeah, we're able to find some lovely depth in the kind of detail that we go into, and to do that through an effective context like music making allows us to answer really serious questions, I think, about power, care, and responsibility, and all of that plays out in our teaching as well. Because when we are in the classroom, how are we negotiating control, collaboration, vulnerability, presence? Are we able to hold that mirror up to ourselves that we use use as a lens to look at the work of others? What can that we can learn from that about our own practice, and how can we hold ourselves to the standards that we seem to be advocating in others? Um, I think that makes that a particularly live nature of this case. Yeah, CMS folk often say about that it's not good enough to talk the talk, but you have to walk the walk as well. And so here is a tool. I know we don't like tools. Like here is here is something to help with that.
Well, isn't that a perfect ending ending almost to our conversation, to think about this walking the talk, and reflecting also on what we do as scholars and what we do as educators. Um, Thank you so much, Richard and Stewart, for your time and for sharing your journey and telling us a little bit about this case. And I'm sure that many people who are listening to this want to start using the case in their teaching and want to know about it even more. And I just want to congratulate you once more on the nomination as one of the finalists this year. And thank you for this conversation.
Thanks, Marka.
Thank you so much.